Dominic by William Steig, 12. When Dominic had eaten his fill, he lay down, just a few scratches, a dozen yawns, a short snooze, and he was on his way again. He soon passed a big stand of pine trees. Their special spicy scent was a tonic. High up on a hickory, not far ahead of him, he was startled to see a goose hanging by the feet, and he hurried toward her. Standing on the treasure chest, he used his spear to cut the rope and get the goose down. "Mercy me!" she cried. "There's smelling salts in my reticule," and, fluttering her wings, she fainted. Dominic managed to bring her to with the smelling salts. She looked around with addled eyes. "Dear dog, dear darling dog," she exclaimed. "I thought my life was over. Imagine to be hanged by the feet while on the way to market, and me a widow with children to look after." "What happened?" asked Dominic. "I was on my way to market," she said tremulously. "So many things we need at home. Soap, flour, sugar. My tea is practically gone. Just a few leaves left in the bottom of the canister. I thought I'd get some cookies for the children, chocolate chip or coconut, some gooseberry jam, some oranges, but these four masked ruffians came pouring out of the trees, and the first thing I knew, I was hanging where you found me. I heard one of them say, 'We'll roast her tonight after we find the cranberries.' And then they were gone. Roast, indeed. I wonder how they would like to be roasted with or without cranberries. And if I didn't have other plans for my life, I don't know how long I've been hanging there. I fainted and came to several times. I thought of the joys of swimming, flying, walking with my little ones. I felt how I loved them and how much they needed me, and I didn't want to die. Goodness, if you hadn't come by when you did, there'd be one less goose in the world. How can I ever repay you?" "Your life is my reward," said Dominic, bowing. "With you in the world is a better place, I'm sure. My name is Dominic, and I am at your service, madam." Dominic was exceptionally attentive to ladies. The goose, getting into the spirit of things, gracefully curtsied. "My name," she said, "is Matilda Fox. I live hereabouts in case you're interested in how a goose got the name Fox. I had an extremely intelligent ancestor. He was so smart they called him the Fox. Eventually, the name was entered in the Hall of Records and became the surname of our family. I think one of my sons takes after him." "How interesting," said Dominic politely. "May I take you home?" "I'd be delighted," said the goose. "This is the way." She took up her reticule and shopping basket. Dominic took up his load, and they set off, waddling and walking down the road. Soon they came to the goose's cottage, situated by a pond in a secluded spot. 5 goslings were swimming in the pond, chattering back and forth and making a ruckus as children often do. Mrs. Fox called them to the bank and introduced them one by one. Their names were Alpha, Beta, Gamma, Delta, and Epsilon. Dominic was enchanted with them. He had tender feelings for young ones of any sort, even for the babies of snakes, a species he otherwise regarded with disfavor. Dominic praised Mrs. Fox's home and her family, and she urged him to stay as long as he liked. He stayed. He frolicked with the children and had diverting and informative conversations with their mother. The children liked to hear him play his piccolo, especially while they swam. They would sometimes do a sort of water dance, a liquid minuet, to his music. In a water polo game one day, the goslings played rings around him, and Dominic was abashed at being bested by such small creatures. But he said to himself, "If water polo was played on land, I could beat them." Mrs. Fox fattened Dominic up with all sorts of elegant cookery, delicious soups, fragrant salads, heavenly pastries, and a variety of dishes made with rare herbs and subtle sauces. He enjoyed sniffing out the ingredients, guessing what was in her recipes. And of course, he was always right. After these wonderful meals, he would lie dreaming in the hammock, or he'd sit by the pond with Mrs. Fox, watching the children and conversing. They spoke of many things. Mrs. Fox spoke of her dead husband, who apparently had been an exceptional goose, and of the problems of raising children without a father. Dominic spoke of his home, his friends, and his thirst for adventure and knowledge of life. Once he asked Mrs. Fox which she liked to do best, walk, swim, or fly, and this was her answer. "I know most creatures can't do all three, and I hope you'll pardon me for saying that I can't understand how they manage that way. Personally, I wouldn't want to give up any means of locomotion in the air or on water or on land. All three are necessary since I spend most of my time on land, and naturally I have to be able to walk. It wouldn't make sense flying between the icebox and the sink, and swimming is useless where there is no water. Walking is good for thinking, and different kinds of walking are good for different kinds of thinking. For example, walking back and forth in a small space is good for thinking about your worries. At times, walking is hard on the feet. Certain kinds of gravel really hurt the webbing between my toes, and there are places I have to avoid for that reason. I love to play tennis, which of course you must do on your feet. I love to work in my garden, pick flowers, and do many other things which can be done on land. Water feels good even when it's cold, and swimming, as you know, is a great pleasure. It's a handy way to cross a stream when there's no bridge. Flying is another way, but of course I can't fly when I'm loaded down with things, which I often am. My reticule, my umbrella, my shopping basket, books from the library, etc. I couldn't get off the ground. Of course not, said Dominic understandingly. Mrs. Fox continued. Swimming is not as good for thinking as walking is, but swimming is wonderful for wool gathering. I love to float in the current with the stream, listen to the gentle lapping by the shoreline, and dream whatever daydreams want to be dreamed. It's so peaceful whenever I feel nerve-wracked, worrying too much about things, getting depressed or irritable wherever I am. I look for water and go for a swim. It's a balm. It's like being back in the egg, floating without a care in benign albumum. And, of course, it's cleansing. Now, as to flying, that's a hard thing to describe to someone without wings. I sometimes dream of flying, Dominic volunteered. Flying is pure delight, said Mrs. Fox, unless you are being chased by birds of prey. There's a rhythm to flying, and it's the rhythm of the universe. It's a cosmic experience. Up there, and especially high up, I feel close to my maker. I have the conviction that my life is eternal, and I will see my dead husband again, rest his soul, floating on air currents, rising with updrafts and warm air, sliding on the downdrops. I feel in perfect harmony with natural events. I feel athletic, graceful. Flying is, of course, the quickest and straightest way from point A to point B. No obstruction to be moved around or under. It's the best way of traveling south in winter and north in spring, and it's ideal for getting a broad view of things. Well, to answer your original question, it would be hard to say which I like best. Each is best in its own way. Dominic understood and had to agree, though he could not swim as well as a goose and could fly only in his dreams. By and by, at the end of 3 days to be exact, he grew restless, anxious to pursue his journey and meet his future. Before leaving, he built a high fence of strong metal netting around the Fox property and strung barbed wire on top of it. And after careful consideration, he filled his pockets with gold pieces and selected a ring to keep for himself. Then he put a pearl necklace around the neck of each gosling, at which they honked their delight, and gave all the rest of the treasure to Mrs. Fox. I can't possibly accept such largesse, she protested. You are too good. It is I who am indebted to you. You saved my life. Think what would have happened to my children without me. She would have gone on, but Dominic stopped her. Madam, he said, Matilda, if I may call you by your first name, I have spent a few of the happiest days of my life in your little Garden of Eden. I have enjoyed your children. Conversation with you has broadened my horizons. I am in the best possible health as a result of your good care. Furthermore, I really have no use for wealth. I'm young, I'm free, and I have a God-given nose to guide me through life. Please say no more. Overwhelmed by his own generosity and the suddenness of parting, he kissed each darling gosling with a tear in his eye, hugged and kissed Mrs. Fox, and was off into the world without further ado. A moment later, Mrs. Fox came flying after him with some pastries to put in his bandana, and they had to say goodbye again. Striding along, aglow with the energy he had stored up, resting and feeding so well, he felt marvelously carefree. He had brought good fortune and happiness to the Foxes and had earned their gratitude, at the same time ridding himself of an encumbrance. And that is the end of chapter 12.